There are people in this world who don't just feel sadness. They gravitate toward it. Not because they enjoy suffering, and not because they want to be miserable, but because sadness feels like a place they understand. A place that has shaped them, held them, protected them, even when it hurt. Some people don't fall in love with sadness in a dramatic way. It happens slowly, quietly, over years. You grow up thinking it's normal to carry heaviness. Normal to walk with a weight on your chest. Normal to feel too deeply, too often. And somewhere along the way, sadness stops feeling like an emotion and starts feeling like home. Sadness is heavy, but it is familiar. And the familiar is always safer than the unknown. People who fall in love with sadness often come from lives where happiness felt unpredictable. Maybe joy arrived in short bursts that disappeared too fast. Maybe smiles were things you had to earn, and love came with conditions. Maybe peace was something that could be taken away in a single moment. And after a while, the heart learns a strange survival trick. It stops trusting happiness, because happiness feels like a visitor. But sadness feels like the one friend who never leaves. Psychologists call it emotional conditioning. When your strongest memories, your deepest lessons, are tied to pain, your mind starts believing pain is the natural state of life. It becomes the baseline, the default setting, the quiet background noise you get used to. And as you grow older, you find comfort in the kind of sadness that doesn't destroy you, but also never lets you go. For some, sadness becomes a language, a way of understanding the world, a way of interpreting love, a way of explaining themselves without needing any words. You see this in small things. They listen to music not to feel better, but to feel understood. They rewatch the same sad scenes in movies, not for the drama, but for the truth inside them. They find beauty in rainy days, empty streets, quiet bedrooms. Not because they're antisocial, but because sadness has become a soft space, where their thoughts finally make sense. To many people, sadness is an emotion to avoid, but to others, sadness feels safe because it is honest. Happiness can be faked. Optimism can be forced. Smiles can be practiced. But sadness doesn't lie. Sadness doesn't pretend. Sadness sits with you exactly as you are. Some people fall in love with sadness because sadness feels more real than happiness ever did. The world has a strange way of treating sadness like weakness. But for these people, sadness becomes strength. Not dramatic sadness, not destructive sadness, but a quiet, reflective kind. The kind that makes you think deeper, feel deeper, understand more. The kind that builds emotional intelligence so sharp that you begin seeing things others miss. Sadness teaches them to pay attention, to listen, to reflect, to understand human behavior in ways most never will. This is why people who fall in love with sadness often become the best observers, the best creators, the best thinkers. Their pain becomes a lens through which they see truth. But let's go deeper, because this attachment to sadness is rarely born in adulthood. It begins in childhood, in the earliest versions of us, the versions that learned to survive in ways we wouldn't understand until much later. Some children grow up feeling unseen, not unloved, just unseen. They learn to shrink themselves, to soften their voice, to hide their needs. They learned that their pain didn't matter unless it was quiet. So they swallowed their feelings. They absorbed the chaos around them. And sadness became the only emotion that truly belonged to them. Other children grew up in emotionally unpredictable homes. Maybe affection was inconsistent. Maybe safety depended on someone else's mood. Maybe the house was loud, or tense, or confusing. In such environments, happiness becomes a luxury, something fragile and temporary. But sadness? Sadness becomes the one constant, the thing you can rely on, the thing that doesn't disappear when the world changes. You learn to brace yourself for disappointment, to expect the good things to end, to assume that if something feels too light, too joyful, too hopeful, it won't last. And as that belief grows, You begin choosing sadness before sadness chooses you. This is why some people sabotage their own joy without realizing it. If you've been hurt by happiness enough times, your brain begins treating joy as a threat. It whispers, "Don't get attached. Don't open up. Don't hope too much." Pushes you back into the arms of sadness, because sadness feels safer than vulnerability. Sadness cannot betray you. Happiness can. But here's the strange twist. People who fall in love with sadness aren't weak. They are often the strongest. They've survived emotional storms others will never understand. They've carried burdens quietly. They've rebuilt themselves in silence. They've learned to keep going, even when their heart feels too tired to beat. Sadness becomes a companion, because sadness is where they learned how to survive. There is another layer to this psychology, one that is rarely discussed. Some people fall in love with sadness, because sadness feels like identity. When you've spent years being the strong one, the quiet one, the emotional one, the misunderstood one, sadness becomes part of your story, part of the way you exist in the world. If you take away the sadness, they don't know who they would be. Joy feels too unfamiliar. Peace feels too foreign. Happiness feels too risky. But sadness feels like themselves. Yet even this is not the whole truth. Because beneath all the layers, beneath all the explanations and psychology and childhood conditioning, there is something even quieter, something almost invisible. People fall in love with sadness when no one ever taught them how to love themselves without it. When life teaches you that you are easier to handle when you are quiet, easier to love when you are small, easier to understand when you're hurting, then sadness becomes a performance you don't even know you're giving. And suddenly, sadness becomes the version of you that the world seems most comfortable with. But here's the reality that often goes unspoken. People who fall in love with sadness are not looking for pain. They are looking for understanding. They crave a space where they don't have to pretend, or impress, or act fine. A space where they can breathe. A space where they can exist, without being judged for feeling too much. Sadness offers that space. But sadness is not the ending of their story. In fact, people who fall in love with sadness are the ones capable of the deepest joy, because they understand its value. They understand its fragility. They understand how rare it is. They feel everything with intensity. The hurt, yes, but also the hope. They just need a world safe enough to experience it. The truth is simple. People don't fall in love with sadness because they want to be sad. They fall in love with sadness because sadness is the only place where they feel like they don't need to apologize for being human. And maybe, just maybe, they don't need to leave sadness behind completely. Maybe they only need to learn that sadness is a chapter, not the whole book. A home they can visit, not the place they must live in forever. Because even people who fall in love with sadness are capable of finding light, not by forcing themselves to be happy, not by pretending everything is fine, but by discovering the one truth they were never taught to believe. You deserve joy. That doesn't disappear. You deserve peace. That doesn't feel temporary. You deserve happiness. That doesn't scare you. You deserve a life where sadness is a visitor, not your permanent home. Even if sadness shaped you, it doesn't have to define you. And maybe the first step is allowing yourself to imagine a version of life where your heart is not always heavy, where your worth is not tied to suffering, where your identity is not built on pain. You are allowed to feel deeply, to think too much, to care intensely. You are allowed to have a heart that remembers all its wounds. But you are also allowed to outgrow the sadness you once loved. Because people who fall in love with sadness are often the ones destined to understand happiness in a way others never will.